Hi, my name's Henry Blake. I'm a filmmaker, and I have also been a youth worker for the past 11 years in London. I grew up in New Zealand, and in New Zealand, I I was a child actor from 12 years old to 17, and I worked quite extensively professionally as a child actor. So my link with film is quite clear there. But at 18, I moved over to the UK, and I initially moved over here because I wanted to tread the boards and be an actor. And of course, when you're committing to that life, you need work. You need to work. You need another job. And I didn't want to be a waiter, or I didn't want to do a bar job. And as it so happened, a lot of my friends, and actually my wife, at the time, I was about 23, so it was a few years on from arriving here, were mentoring and tutoring children who had been kicked out and excluded from mainstream school. And it was good work, it was relatively well paid, and it was interesting. It was different. It wasn't what most artists were doing at that time. And so I got involved, and I was encouraged to. And that really was the entry point to my youth work for many years. And it was something that I think it's important to say, because I never went into it going, I want to be a youth worker. I kind of fell into it. And same with film directing. I never wanted to be a film director. I just ended up with these two things. And it's strange how life does that to you, I think, because I was going, I'm going to be a big actor, which I'm glad that didn't happen, because I was okay, but I wasn't that good. And of course, like what John Lennon said, life is what happens to you when you're making other plans. And I think that came true. But I initially started mentoring and tutoring one-to-one children, mainly boys, who were excluded from mainstream school for a plethora of reasons. It could have been behavioral. It could have been because of SEN needs. Unfortunately, they did experience exclusion. It could have been because of family dynamics and what was going on in the home. And as a 23-year-old young man who was, from New Zealand, it was a shock to the system. It kind of ripped me apart, because I ended up, just so happens, working with some really, really vulnerable children. And it really, still to this day, it makes a huge impact on me. Like what I saw as a young man, the level of sort of social care issues, and the depth of those, and the ferocity of them, it really shook me to the core. But it was the best thing for me, I think, because it gave me this perspective on my life and on valuing what I had in my life as a young man. And I think that is a very sobering, necessary lesson. And I think one of the major issues that I had was I was good at working with very vulnerable children. I found myself being able to be very patient with them. I was very willful. I wouldn't give up very easily. And I mean, for instance, I worked with a young boy, very, very tragic case, which I won't go into the details for obvious reasons, but I worked with a young boy in Plumstead. And he was so used to having professionals come in and out of his life that he kind of obviously threw all of his behavior at me, just everything, expecting that I would walk away, expecting that I'd be like, I can't handle this, because a lot of professionals had. And I sort of thought, I was young enough, when you're doing it and you're that young, 23, 24, 25, you've got a lot of energy. You're like, and I was like, no, I'm not going to give up on this. I'm going to turn up every single day, until he just goes, oh, he's not going anywhere. And so we got into this like battle of wills where he was like throwing everything at me going, I'm going to break you. And I was like, I'm not going to be broken. And eventually, after 3 months, he trusted me, you know, and we ended up actually having quite a powerful, you know, relationship. There were many things going on in his life outside of me, and they were big determining factors as to where he went. But I think my youth work career started when I was a very young man. I was very impressionable. I had a lot of energy, and at the same time, it really transformed me. And that then fed into my art, my filmmaking. And at the time that I'm describing here, when I was 23, 24, I was in a massive wrestle with myself, because I recognized in myself that I didn't want to act anymore. And for anyone listening who's had a dream since they were, you know, this high, you know, a little baby, it's really terrifying to let go of that dream. You know, it's a really scary thought to go, I don't want to do that. And my whole life had been about that. I was very lucky in that all of my friends, my wife included, who produced County Lines, were actors and painters and artists. And at the time of me, I was leading 2 lives, and I have led 2 lives for quite a while now. And it's only now with the film that they've kind of merged. But I was leading 2 lives. I was doing this youth work, and I was doing this very intense one-to-one youth work, being exposed to all sorts of things. And at the same time, I would sort of do that in the morning or the afternoon, and then I would go away and have this existential crisis about me and going, I want to be an actor. I don't know what the hell I'm doing with my life. But my friends needed a director. You know, actors always need directors. They want to put on shows. They want to, when they're doing monologues, they want to rehearse them, and you always need that outside eye. And because I kind of didn't want to act, I put my hand up all the time and said, well, I'll work with you on the monologue for the audition, or I'll direct that play, or, you know, little fringe plays and things. And it so happens that my friends, my very good friends, again, my wife included, said to me, you know, with the greatest respect, Henry, you're a better director than you are an actor. And you've really got something. And it was really Victoria, my wife, who said, I think you're really good at directing. And it just so happened that I sort of recognized that when I was doing it, I was enjoying it. And I hadn't enjoyed an artistic practice for a long time. I think, you know, when you want to do something so badly like acting, sometimes you kind of almost talk yourself out of the job. With directing, there was no attachment. It just sort of fell into my lap. I always say I always felt that it found me, you know, and I was very lucky that I had friends who encouraged me. But then the question was, okay, well, what am I going to do? And I didn't want to do theatre because I wasn't particularly passionate about it. And, you know, we've all been to plays that were 3 hours long, and I was like, I don't want to create a 3-hour play. But I loved film. I had grown up doing a bit of film in New Zealand. My parents, my mum and dad, are massive cinephiles. We would go to the cinema every Sunday. We would discuss film all the time. And it just so happened that Victoria, at the same time, in my early 20s, introduced me to the work of John Cassavetes and Jenna Rowlands, who were a married couple in America, who are kind of seen as the godfather and godmother of independent cinema in the US, and the work of Lars von Trier. And those films blew my mind. You know, I was like, I mean, watching Breaking the Waves, Lars von Trier's Breaking the Waves, or Woman Under the Influence by Cassavetes, it was like, I'd never really seen films like that before. And I knew when I watched those, I went, that's what I want to do. I want to create those types of films. So then we cracked on and made short films, right? And at the same time, I was doing my youth work. And I deliberately kept those lives very separate. I never wanted to merge them. I never felt the need to. In fact, because of what I was seeing in my youth work, which was so distressing, I was like, I don't want to do that. You know, I don't want to do that. And so the short film served as an experimental phase, which, you know, you should always do when you're in whatever art you're in. You need to experiment. But at the same time, I was just consistently working as a youth worker with so many vulnerable young people, and within the social care sector, I was dealing with all sorts of issues, very serious issues, very, very serious issues, and working with local authorities, working with parents, I was exposed to the whole system, if you like, and uh, and trying to sort of make sense of it all, because it all at times felt so contradictory, and felt like we're all we all want to help, but it doesn't all fit together. It all seems to be so bureaucratically led. And, you know, for me, when you're, and I'm sure any youth worker will understand this, is when you're on that sort of front line, if you like, and just working with a child every day, you, you, your point of view is of the child, is of the needs, is maybe the more nuanced point of view. And then you go and sit in a meeting and you've got some psychologists, you've got social workers, you've got, you know, all the other wraparound care and the local authority, and they're saying something else. And you're the one that's seeing them every day. And you're like, but that's not what I'm seeing. And so it was a struggle, because I was so young as well. My point of view was often not valued on the same level as those professionals. Does that make sense? And I really struggled with that. I really struggled with the fact that, you know, I was the one that was turning up every day, and these other professionals, as great as they probably were, they were maybe seeing the child once every 2 months, you know. And I still feel that there's having gone around the country with the film, and also the short version of the film County Lines, and met so many safeguarding professionals, that frustration is shared by many frontline professionals, you know, where, because you accrue certain information, certain detail, emotional information, psychological information that you might not otherwise know of that young person, and you start to create a very detailed picture of the needs, of the perspective of how that young person really feels. You feed it into the system, and then the question mark is, does that information go where it needs to go? Or is it blocked, or is it ignored, or is it lost in the ether, you know? So at the time in my mid-20s, I was dealing with all of this, and then I was also dealing with trying to sort of go, okay, I'm now going to commit to a life in film, you know? Quite full on, actually. Like, I've never really spoken about it in this way. But again, I would say to anyone watching, like, you can do it whenever you want. Anyone can be an artist, or whatever they want to do whenever they want. We've got a great world in that respect now. But I think the saving grace for me was that I was so young in all of this, you know, because I was so malleable, and, like, you know, you have so much dynamic when you're in your early 20s, mid 20s, and you can kind of bounce back very quickly from things if you know, if you have the right support there. So I started sort of within my work, doing group work then with very high risk young offenders, and it was really full on. I was then exposed kind of to another level of, I guess, young person, if you like, who had heavy criminal sentences, were either had been involved, or were involved, or were participating in, I guess, gang-related crime. And I'd never really come across that before. I'd never come across that sort of upper echelon, if you like, of young person that was, you know, really committing quite serious offences, and where there was a real sense as well with these young people of the stakes of how life and death this really is. If you know, if there are issues either with, you know, other young people, it's not that, you know, they don't write an email to one another saying, you know, I don't agree with what you did. It was really full on, and I was then exposed to a lot of violence. I saw a lot of violence, and I found that very distressing. Violence in the real world is not nice to see. It's not nice, and when you're dealing with serious youth violence, it's extremely distressing. And I didn't, if I'm honest, I didn't really feel equipped for it. You know, I hadn't trained to be a police officer. I had no formal training in this. But again, I could work with these young people, and to some degree I really enjoyed it. I found it very dynamic and interesting, fascinating young people, very talented always, you know, great skill sets, great ability, great charisma, great energy, but just all going that way, you know, and trying to get them to go that way. um, so that was a big moment for me as well, where I was kind of beginning to get exposed to, I think, another level of vulnerability, but also another level of violence. Um, and then in 2015, I think Victoria and I, up in 2015, we had made a number of short films, and we felt that it was time to try and make a first feature film. You know, we had made, I think, about 5 or 6 short films. And I think it was right. You know, we were like, okay, we want that next challenge. We hadn't had any success with our short films, really. We didn't want to go to film school. So we knew going into it that it was going to be an ordeal, because I think the talent development channels in the UK within film are quite rigorous and stubborn in that they're quite set, and that is changing now as they need to change, but there are quite rigorously set channels of talent development, whether that be film schools, whether that be doing a short film via BFI or Channel 4, and then you're recognized through that and kind of seen as an up and coming talent. But really what you need is a calling card, you know. And I didn't have a calling card. You know, we tried to get a script off the ground, and people said it's well written, and we worked very hard on it, but it just didn't go anywhere. And none of our short films, like I said, did anything. And I'm very open about that, because I feel like there's a perception that when you've made a film that everything has just gone right for you, and that, you know, you must have been really up and coming to make the film, and that's not true at all. I had no agent. We barely had any festivals to our name, and we weren't coming through any major film school. So we knew that we had to work very, very hard, you know, very, very hard. So all that in mind, in 2015, my friend and colleague called me up, and I'd worked with her a number of times, and she is probably the most skilled, brilliant professional that I've seen working with young people. She's just the best, you know, and she's now going into senior leadership positions through in institutions, which is great to see. And that gives me so much hope, because, you know, she's so wonderful, and the fact that she's climbing that ladder goes to show that things are changing, you know. But she called me up and she was working in a PRU, a pupil referral unit. And she said, look, I've got two groups here and I need help because what we're dealing with here is I've never really seen this before. And would you come and help me? And I was like, yeah, okay, sure. But what are we talking about? And she said, just come and you know, you'll see. I'd been in pupil referral units before that. It wasn't that I hadn't been in a pupil referral unit. I'd worked in a number of them. Some were great, some not, you know. But so it wasn't the PRU that particularly, it didn't make me go, oh no, but I was just interested. So I went and worked, and it was a rare commission in that it was for 1 year, you know, it was the whole year. And that's quite rare in youth work. You don't really get commission for a whole year. And I thought that's really wonderful. One, because it, you know, on a sort of practical level, it's like consistent income, which for a young person is important in London. It wasn't a lot of money, but that it was consistent. But the other, what I saw and what I had come to grow very frustrated with in my youth was time, or lack of time. And so to be commissioned that for that long, I was like, well, that's a real great opportunity to forge, you know, positive relationships with these young people. And we can create like a really good picture with the PRU as to what's happening with the young people. So I went along and you know, I was pretty taken aback at the intensity of what these young people were going through. And I think initially, you know, when you're dealing with very distressed, traumatized young people, it kind of all hits you at once. And it wasn't till about a third of the way in that I was like, what is actually going on here? Why are they disappearing all the time? Like, why are we dealing with children who are going away for a couple of weeks, coming back, and then there's all sorts of injuries, there's all sorts of abrasions, there's loads of trauma, there's tears, it was really intense. And the Pru were doing a great job. There was one teacher in the Pru who I paid tribute to in the film through the teacher Lawrence, who works very closely with the main character Tyler. He was wonderful. He made such an impact on me. Such a great teacher, you know, just one of you see those teachers and you just go, you've got it, you've got the gift. And every young person came to him, you know, and how tired he must have felt. And so I'm often asked, people think that that's me in the film. I'd never do that, never pay tribute to myself. That's just mad. But he made a huge impact on me. And this is where County Lines then came up. The term in 2015 then, from a public perception perspective, was being used a lot more as well. So it was a kind of collision of that term suddenly going public, if you like, and then also being told what these children were experiencing. And I guess, giving all the backstory that I've just given, if you were to think of the vulnerable children that I was working with at the beginning of my sort of youth work career, and then the high level young offenders that I was working with, it was that in the Pru, you know, it was desperate vulnerability, desperate trauma, but with this operational criminal activity that was so organized and terrifying. And it was when one boy, who was very talented musician, wonderful young boy, really, kind of low level status within the group, sometimes was bullied by his friends, but overall I think very much loved by his friends. It was when he went missing for 3 weeks. He came back into area, his throat was slashed. He turned up at the PRU. I got to spend some time with him, trying to establish where he'd been, and he told me he'd been in Aberdeen. It was then another boy who, probably 99% of people who would meet this boy would go, I want him to be put behind bars because he doesn't make me feel safe. It was when, in the final stages of our work, when he burst into tears and told us what had happened to him, and the neglect and the what he had been exposed to in his life, the violence, the abuse, and how he had lost his best friend through, I guess, a rival criminal network, if you like. It was when I saw him cry in front of me. It was like, it was so visceral, the pain of him, the grief that came out of him, and the way he said, no one cares, no one cares about this. And I have to walk around every day, you know. I knew then that in my heart, something had to be done. I couldn't walk away from this experience and not share it with people. And I guess that was the one. I think that's what makes you different when you're, say, an artist or you have artistic sensibilities, is that most people would have that experience, come away from it, feel very distressed, and kind of go, well, I don't really know what to do. And over time would slowly forget about it, or it would disappear into the back of their minds. But I think as an artist, the need is to share it, is to share your experiences and to use a form, whether that be cinema, art, painting, acting, poetry, whatever it is, music, to express your perspective or your point of view on that experience. And I came out the other side of that, and my friend, and we were both really shaken, and we still talk about it today. We still talk about that year. We all have these formative years. We all have these years that we all remember, whether that's your university year, whether that's your, I don't know, we all have these years, these powerful experiences where they kind of can either make you or break you in many ways. And that was that year. And I knew in my heart that I had to do something. I knew it wasn't being opportunistic, and then it wasn't like, putting my hands together and going, right, I've got a film, I'm going to use this. It wasn't that. It was, oh God, it was like, I haven't wanted to do this. I've actively gone against this for 5-6 years, But, it's like when you fall in love, the films teach you that when you fall in love, romantic music starts and it's all roses and strawberries and chocolate. And it's like, actually, the truth is, when you fall in love with someone, like I fell in love with my wife, it's not that, it's, oh God, because it messes up your plans. Do you know what I mean? Like, it completely screws up your plans. You're like, I've got plans, and now I've fallen in love. And that's what it was like with knowing that I had to make a film. It was like, everything that I have said that I wouldn't do, I'm going to now have to do. Everything that I've said that I'm going to keep separate, everything that I've said that I'm not going to be as a filmmaker, everything I'm going to have to now do that, But I couldn't get these young people out of my head. It was what they were going through was so wrong, and they weren't perfect. They never are, but who is? And if we set that as a precedent of saying, well, they're difficult, are you saying then that they somehow deserve to be caught up in one of the biggest child exploitation crises of our time? I can't agree with that. I can't go along with that. So then it was about trying to tell the truth from their perspective. What would it feel like? What does this actually feel like? What's the impacts that it has on these parents? And to create something with great integrity, with great art, with great thought and care. And then, then the challenge really started, because you were trying to take something which is extremely difficult subject matter, and then you're also trying to convince people in an industry who quite simply do not have an understanding of that subject matter to back you when you don't have a calling card. So, it was a mountain. And we then accepted, Victoria and I, that we had to make a short version of the film as a proof of concept. Also, I felt important that if we were going to test drive this material, it would be a good opportunity to try and find the right people who would have their hearts in the right place to do it. And that's when we made the short film. And that was, I remember, and I've never had it since, and I never had it before, but I remember when we were making the short film in the lead up to it, we were given no financial support. We put a lot of our own money into it, which was a big risk, and it was, but we believed in it. And it's only when you believe in something that you can kind of understand that choice. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I wouldn't say to anyone, put your money in for your own films, but I knew culturally that the issue was important enough. I believed that it was important enough. And I also, unfortunately, believed that it wasn't going to go away. But so we did that. And in the lead up to the short, when we were prepping, every single night when I went to bed, I got this searing pain in my neck, like this really searing pain. And I would wake up every night, in great agony. And it went on through the shoot. And then we shot just before Christmas, so we had a break. And then I got the rushes back, which are you shoot and then you can view what you've shot. And I got the rushes back and I looked at it and I was like, oh, yeah, that's good. It's good. It feels right. It's tonally, it's good. And the pain stopped. I spoke to my dad about it, and he was like, it's anxiety. It was anxiety. I was under a lot of anxiety because I'd never done that subject matter before. I'd never brought my experience. I felt very exposed. All of these things were going on, and I was going up a gear in terms of filmmaking. And so we made the short film, and then we did a screening at BAFTA of it. And there was a lot of interest from the safeguarding community, and they came, and there was a lot of interest in the film. And then we went through a sort of, I'd say a year to 18 months, I think, of trying to get backing, of which we didn't succeed. David Broder, who's the other producer on the film, he had committed to the film, and he was going to put up a portion of the funds, but we had to find the rest. And really in 2017, 2018, we had got no's from everyone. I remember where we were in, the final no came in, and we were all sat in Camden at the Roundhouse, because I do some work there with young people. And I remember the final no came in, and it was like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Like, we can't walk away from this, and that's the tough thing when you're trying to get a project off the ground, is you are faced with that risk of, this might not work out. This might not work. We might have to walk away from this. And you've put in hundreds of hours, And I remember we sat there, and I was just like, we have to do it. We have to make this film. We cannot not make this film, because culturally it's too important. And we have done too much work, and it's going to move people in a way that will be important. And we can't walk away from this. So we made a call that we were going to shoot with the money that we had. which was nothing. But I thought, we've got to make this. The other reason was because at the time, County Lines was really starting to gain traction in mainstream press. And I was starting to read a lot about it. Some of the reportage was inaccurate and was, I felt, skin deep from a youth work perspective in terms of its perspective on the issue. It was missing out key components within the reporting. It was basically all focused through the sort of criminal lens, and there wasn't this innate vulnerability and exploitation of vulnerability that I had seen, but also that's what makes County Line so singular, you know. And I was like, someone else is going. This was all coming out, and I thought, someone else is going to do this. Some other filmmakers filmmakers can make whatever they want to make, and often filmmakers will read something in a newspaper, and I thought, someone else will do this, and they won't do it right. You know, that's not to say that there's many talented filmmakers out there, of course, but I just felt, I was like, this is our story. There's no, this is our story. We have to tell this. And so, yeah, we made the call to shoot the film. And so we did. And we were running on fresh air. But where I was very lucky is that I was never interfered with artistically. I was always, my experience as a youth worker from the filmmakers that I was working with was always encouraged, and it was never seen as a problem. So that experience was at the forefront of many creative decisions, which I think is very lucky. I felt very lucky to be able to be given that space. And I wasn't really interfered with. You know, I was able to make the film that I wanted to make. And of course, we were very lucky with the actors, because Aisha Bywaters, the casting director that I worked with, who was just fantastic. And I was very clear that I didn't want to work with children who were experiencing or had experienced county lines because of trauma, also because of a whole list of safeguarding issues that can happen. And I like working with actors. You know, I think having this conversation, maybe people will understand where that origin is, and that it's in me. As I grew up with actors, I've always been around actors since I was about 10 years old, to be honest. And I've been around professional actors since I was 10 years old. So that's where my need to work with actors comes from. I think traditionally, probably a film like this, you'd street cast and go down that road, but I didn't want to do something like that. I wanted to do something more formal, more rigorous, more disciplined, and more striking. And there were a whole host of preconceived ideas as to what the film would be, you know, because youth and drugs has been explored in British cinema many times. But I knew that I could deliver a film that would touch people in a striking way, and have integrity, and have compassion for its characters, you know. And I think as a youth worker, that's a major fundamental skill that if you do youth work consistently enough, you begin to develop very, very strong, compassionate skills for young people or for whoever that you are working. Because most of the time when you are working with vulnerable people, they do not present vulnerable straight away. They often present difficult, defiant, volatile, defensive, silent, detached. And that is all mechanisms of not allowing you in. Probably not allowing you in, because if I do, I'll be hurt, and I've been hurt my whole life. And I don't want to be hurt again, you know? And the skill of the youth worker is to understand that context, is to see that behavior and understand the context of that behavior, and not judge and not stigmatize and not build a level of preconceived ideas, and actually just have compassion. And that's why youth work is so important, because that behavior is often judged immediately by other adults or by other people in that person's life. And the youth worker can often say, hold on a minute, this behavior actually is a symptom of a series of vulnerabilities and failures that young person or adult has experienced, and we're not attending to those. We need to safeguard those, you know, so that doesn't happen again. And I think compassion is so important there. You know, it's so important because it creates a deeper understanding of these very complex behaviors. And if we don't deepen our understanding, then we can't really author progressive new approaches that really have long-term impact to vulnerable people, you know? And so I think compassion is really important, you know? And levels of compassion in everyone is different, isn't it? But I've got friends who have been doing youth work, and it's funny because, like, in the social care sector, I think there's loads of people who just have that in abundance. You know, they just, that's why they're there. That's why they do the work, you know, and they like connecting with people. And I'm one of those, you know. I miss, lockdown's very difficult in that respect because of the lack of social connectedness and togetherness and feeling like you're with someone. You know, so yeah, but that's a very long answer. But it's probably the most detailed answer I've ever given, to be honest. I hope that it makes some degree of sense, because I haven't really ever sat down and reflected on it like this, you know. But it all, I think to anyone listening, you know, I think it's important that people understand that, you know, not a lot of this has happened just through life unraveling and being very intuitive, and, you know, listening to your heart and all of that, rather than, I think sometimes there's a perception of, well, this is what I was going to do, this is what I did, like, this is, you know, point to point life storytelling, which doesn't, certainly not my life works like that, you know.